Hello everyone, this is Poohhead189, your resident Warhammer lore expert, and today we're going to be talking about the one and only Elspeth von Draken, the head of the Amethyst Order, Dark Lady of Nuln, and nicknamed the Graveyard Rose. So Elspeth is a fairly recent addition to the roster of characters in the Warhammer Fantasy setting, and barely has more than a passing mention in the fully canon material released by Games Workshop. She showed up in 8th edition, and for those wondering on the timeline, 9th edition was the last edition before Warhammer Fantasy began the end times and then went kablooey. 8th edition happening around July of 2010. She appeared in a supplement called Tamarkon, the Throne of Chaos, that being one of the only 2 supplement books published in Warhammer Forge, that having started in 2011 and ending in 2015 with the launch of Age of Sigmar. Tamarkon follows the campaign of the Nurgle champion of the same name, as he rampages through the Empire and attempts to conquer Nuln. As you know from the title I gave her at the beginning of the video, she is the Dark Lady of Nuln, and the city-state is her home. And if you are unaware, Nuln is an incredibly important city. It is a huge metropolitan center, the capital of the province of Weissenland, and very different and far more sophisticated than its home province. In fact, the Elector Countess kind of wants to separate the city from the province that it rules because it's just so different from the usual sort of country bumpkins. And also Nuln is the home of the Imperial Gunnery School and the Engineers Guild, as well as hosting one of the most well-drilled pike and shot combined arms militaries in the Empire. However, before we talk about Nuln and its connection to the Lady von Draken, let's discuss the Amethyst Order. So there are 8 winds of magic recognized by the Empire of Man. One of them, likely the one with the most stigma attached to it, is the Lore of Death, which is called the Wind of Shyish. It's apparently the most difficult to see, since it can travel between past, present, and future, since death is all around us and prevalent with everything. Now, the mages who utilize Shyish, called the Amethyst Order in the Empire, have the ability to deal death, but they are not necromancers. The lore of death is not the lore of undeath, so keep that in mind. In fact, the Order of Mor, the god of death, also has ties to the lore of death, meaning the magic, and it's their job to inter the dead and make sure undeath is impossible. Now, ties does not necessarily mean they fully embrace it, as they can also sometimes have the wrong impression that Shyish is necromancy, but inadvertently some of their blessings coincide with the wind of Shyish, and Mor is extremely likely to be the origin of Shyish, but that's a whole can of worms. My point is, don't think that Elspeth is a necromancer because she is not. But since we are speaking of her, let's bring her into the center stage. Now, Elspeth von Draken, the latest head of the von Draken family, is one of many powerful individuals that have been touched by the winds of magic and have come from the von Drakens, for both good or ill. Apparently, she has been active in Nuln for 3 generations, and usually a generation tends to last around 25 to 30 years in terms of history, so she is far older than she appears. In fact, Elspeth, while she is darkly clad and morose, looks younger than 30, despite having resided in her grim tower on the outskirts of Nuln for what the Winds of Magic supplementary material says is over a century, so we can glean that she has been around in the ballpark of 100 years or more. Now, while she is the head of the Amethyst Order, she had very little to do with the running of the college or the political affairs of it. When he was in office, the High Patriarch Thyrus Gorman was somewhat annoyed at her for her evident lack of interest in her post, her enigmatic manners, and potentially even her rising power. However, I would say that the last part could be debatable. Also, if you are unaware, the High Patriarch is the current head of the Colleges of Magic, and Thyrus Gorman is a master of flame magic, FYI, and Balthazar Gelt succeeded him after. It appears Elspeth only appears to summons either for the colleges or for Nuln in dire circumstances. During the invasion of Tamarkon, Nuln's Countess Emanuel von Leibowitz knew the situation was truly dire when Elspeth bothered to appear in court. In the text, it says, "But for the Countess Emmanuelle who ruled her fractious city-state from behind her impassive mask of porcelain, it was the reappearance at court of the amethyst magisterix, Elspeth von Draken, that was the surest indication that a cataclysm was at hand. Elspeth von Draken was feared and renowned in equal measure by those who ruled Nuln. The powerful wizardess usually stood apart from the politics of imperial power and the empire's colleges of magic, engaging with the city only when some dire peril or deadly rival plagued it, and that von Draken's eerie voice was now added to the chorus of predicted bloodshed was proof enough for the Countess that Leitpold's story held validity. The Magisterix Elspeth in closed session of the Countess' War Council spoke of the restless, invisible winds of magic and how they waved strong and savage. She spoke of how the souls of the dead had spoken to her of the coming storm, and how for long moons she had felt Shaiish, the deathly force that empowered her own arcane art, drawn like iron fillings to a lodestone, flowing ever southwards hungrily to the horde and the stain of slaughter it wrought upon the world. With the dread carmine dragon that was her steed, enslaved to her will by the amethyst magic that flowed like blood through her veins, she had followed the invisible currents of death into the ravaged border princes and hovered like a carrion crow above the fields of the slain and stole secrets from the dying souls she had found there. Elspeth von Draken knew the face of the enemy and the horror they would visit upon Sigmar's empire. Now, you might ask why Elspeth is so hard to reach and why she cares little for the affairs of the Colleges of Magic, and only helps Nuln because she requires their patronage, and that is because she is an avid experimenter, and is obsessed with trying to free herself from her earthly ties and to grow more powerful. She is so imbued by the wind of death that she stands halfway between life and death and can transform into an insubstantial specter, leading many folk to whisper she can hardly be thought of as human. However, she has not broken her bonds with the mortal plane, and while her ties with the Colleges of Magic is often ignored, though many are profoundly grateful she still feels some fealty to the place she was once a student, she has sworn herself to aid Countess Emmanuelle von Leibowitz and Nuln in a time of war, and for important mystical matters. She also has long-standing ties with the cult and priesthood of Mor. During the Tamarkan campaign, Elspeth and her Carmine Dragon killed innumerable swaths of Kurgan marauders and even smote a great unclean one during the siege, which is one of the most dangerous demons of Nurgle. In fact, the demise of the champion Tamarkan was a plan of Elspeth's design, and he collapsed in a warp torrent of his own power before he could ascend to demonhood, Elspeth watching with smug satisfaction. During times of peace, however, she is still not perpetually stuck in her tower. She is reputed to come out and slay threats, such as the Mire Hulk called Rawbones, who demanded a bloody tribute in young lives from the villages along the River Sol. Elspeth also destroyed a Lamian vampire called Vashara before she could corrupt the noble Jägersbruck family of Pfieldorf and pull the city into undeath. However, these instances are few and far between, and the High Patriarch, both Thyrus Gorman and Balthasar Gelt at different times, were growing impatient with her. Thyrus Gorman had hired various spies around, and some of his subordinates believed his paranoia over her would eventually lead into a deadly confrontation between the two immeasurably powerful practitioners. And when Balthasar Gelt succeeded Gorman, he too was very wary of Elspeth and kept his eye on her. Elspeth also has a vast array of mystical items she gathers from her travels, presumably stored in her grim tower. However, on hand she has the Pale Scythe, which is a weapon that is so sharp and keen it's said to murder the still air, and it appears to be made more from shadow than substance. Evidently, it is of Elspeth's own making and is attuned to the power of Shaiish. Next is Death's Timekeeper, an ancient hourglass that is said to contain the dust of a dead god. Elspeth has spent many decades studying its mysteries. Many seek the item, though Elspeth and her dragon guard it jealously, as they guard all of her artifacts presumably. At the core of her character, while she is macabre and gothically horrific, she is a woman who wishes to be the best, on her own terms. She would potentially teach a like-minded independent student if a promising wizard proved to her they had similar ambitions, though she would still keep the secrets of her long life and attempting to break through her mortal shell to herself. However, someone would have to first garner the attention of someone Elspeth has ties with, like maybe Countess Emanuel von Leibowitz, to get an audience with Elspeth. You could, of course, try to prove your strength and ideals in the countryside, but if she even takes notice, she might instead believe you to be a threat than a potential student, and simply snuff the life out of you and drag you into the cold realm of death. Finally, a brief note on her famous mount. She rides a great carmine dragon into battle, and if you are unaware, a carmine dragon is a rare subspecies of dragon that is infused with Shyish magic, or the lore of death. According to arcane lore, they are created when a dragon nest is saturated with Shyish, and the dragons are born with strange and lustrous scales, supple as sin and harder than steel, which begin a deep ruby red when they are young, darkening to a purple so deep as to be almost black as they age. Their breath weapon is not flame, but a concentrated stream of death magic that disintegrates metal and flesh. They are extremely temperamental dragons, and it's rare even for elves to ride them. A carmine dragon is often sought after by powerful death wizards, but these attempts at taming or allying with the dragon often end in the death of one or the other, usually the wizard. In Elspeth's case, she has somehow not only tamed one, but enslaved the mind of her dragon, an insane feat when one knows how powerful a dragon's will is. Her carmine dragon's name is unknown, but it's a powerful mount and battle beast, making Elspeth that much more formidable. Alright everyone, that seems to be everything we have today on Elspeth von Draken. Honestly, she's a baddie and a really cool, more recent character. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe if you think I deserve it, and I always welcome comments. Have a great one everyone. See ya!